Welcome to the Pharmacy Leaders Podcast with your host, Tony Guerra. The Pharmacy Leaders Podcast is a member of the Pharmacy Podcast Network, with interviews and advice on building your professional network, brand, and a purposeful second income from students, residents, and innovative professionals.
Well, welcome again to the Pharmacy Leaders Podcast. I know a lot of you guys are thinking about interviews and hoping for some good news in your inboxes from residencies around the country. So I brought Jackie Boyle in to help us out, tell her road. She did PGY1, then PGY2, and is in an academic position at NEOMED in Ohio. So welcome to the Pharmacy Leaders Podcast, Jackie.
Hi, Tony. Thanks for having me.
Okay, well, let's get started right away. My wife and I did Scramble, so our journey is completely different than probably what you went through. But what I wanted to do is kind of get your perspective. We've gotten Brandon's perspective already on it, but your perspective on, you're here in January. What was it like the January that you were starting to get those interview notices that yes, there were residency sites that were excited to bring you in?
Oh, gosh. So that feeling is both thrilling and terrifying because you've worked so hard. And students, I know if you're listening, you've worked so hard. So give yourself some credit for getting this far because it's a lot of work and a lot of time and effort to prepare for residency and even just the application process. So back in the day when I applied, it was paper applications. So believe it or not, we sent our applications through snail mail. And that was a little bit scary because you just hoped and prayed that your application actually made it to the RPD. And knowing how slow sometimes hospital mail transport can be, you wanted to know that it got there on time. So start this process as early as possible. I realize we have forecasts now, but the holidays, if you want to spend some time with your family, get into forecast as soon as it opens, get that application done, and then come January, you start to see those emails rolling in.
So tell me about that. Tell me what actually happens, though. Now, I know your system was a little bit different with forecast, but how are you advising the students now, or are you working with the students like, hey, let me know as soon as you get an email, and then we can start talking about the process? How do you support your students at NEOMED with these types of things?
Yeah, so when I was a student, I actually went to NEOMED as well. When I was a student, we did not have any dedicated resources to helping students prepare for residency training. My mentor and now colleague, Tim Ulbrich, started during the end of my third professional year, and he was the new dedicated resource to residency. So while we didn't have any courses or preparation at the time, we all kind of flooded his office, and thank you, Tim, for everything.
Okay.
Now that we've developed our programming much more, we have a elective track that students can opt into that prepares them from residency from their first year through their fourth year. We also have a third year residency elective course that helps the students prepare most of their materials for forecasts and also make some good networking connections with local programs in Northeast Ohio, because we find that a lot of our students actually end up staying in the area. So those resources are invaluable. Students, please take advantage of, and I'll use that word, take advantage of your faculty and their network that they've built, the skills that they've had. They've likely been in contact with residency directors in the area, and especially if you have any dedicated academic programming towards residency preparation, use that to your advantage, because that can really help you take the stress off of this time of year and the application process. And then you can reach out to your mentors and faculty when you do start receiving emails. We don't have a mandatory process to say that students need to contact us when they start getting notifications, but we do have several of them that ask us about how to navigate the process as it's happening. So, for example, you're probably going to get notification from all of your programs within the second or third week of January. And you have to decide then how you're going to schedule these interviews. So what if there's an interview at 2 different places on the same day and you have to pick between those 2 programs?
Oh my gosh, that's a terrible choice to have to make.
Yeah, and that doesn't happen often. I'd say more often it's programs offer 3 or 4 days for interviews, and some of them conflict with 3 or 4 days that others have offered. So how do they prioritize which program to interview with first? But I have seen maybe 1 or 2 situations where they only offered 1 interview day. Another program also only had 1 day left, for example, and the student did have to select between those 2 programs, which is really unfortunate.
Okay, so tell me a little bit now about the actual travel plans, getting things together. My wife and I were a pair as we were applying for residency, or we were a couple in the scramble. Made complete turnaround in terms of we were going to do DC Baltimore area, or she was going to do DC Baltimore, then we decided to do Midwest. Tell me a little bit about how that happens, how you get the emails and you start plotting out your trip around the country. You're free to move around the country, as they say.
Yes. Well, firstly, it's good to notify your APPE preceptor that you are in this process. Depending on what rotation you have in late January, February, and even early March, sometimes interviews can happen. You'll want to let them know that you are going through the residency process and you may need to request some days to go interview. If you are traveling out of the area, you'll likely want to budget at least 1 day for travel, depending on where you're going, and you'll need to know when you need to be there. So some programs do have a dinner the night before or some commitment the day before your interview that they'll want you to be present for, and they'll let you know that way ahead of time. I will say I did have one situation where I was notified pretty late, I think it was the last week of February, about an interview offer, and getting close to, ranking time, I was debating. It was out of the area. I didn't know if I wanted to fly. The flights were astronomical because it was, a week before I had to actually go to this interview. Well, my parents were very supportive and said, hey, we'll help you out with this. We will help you fund this trip because this is the only time you're going to interview for residency. So anyway, I ended up going on a short turnaround. And it was definitely worth, going on that flight. So budget money-wise as well. So, as you're looking at your financial aid or your personal budget for these next couple of months, if you're going to be traveling, you have to think about the hotel stay, the food. What if you need to Uber or get a taxi to go somewhere? You're likely going to need that, unless you're driving for some reason, depending on how far it is. So think of all these financial implications as well when you're making your final commitments to selecting interviews. Okay,
so you've decided on your interviews. Let's say you have landed at one of your interviews. Take us through that day. Tell us the story of that day, because I think many students are they hear about residency and they hear about the actual what's going on and they see residents, but they don't actually see what a residency day looks like. So they wouldn't be in on, residency hiring process or something like that, or the residency interview process.
Right.
So tell me about the interview day and some of the tips that you have for succeeding in making it through what I believe is an exhausting process.
Yes. So can we talk about the day before?
Oh yeah, I didn't. So I'm kind of naive to it because we did the scramble. So it was just come on in, meet with the RPD, have food, meet the residency sites, and go back. So what was yours like?
Yeah. Oh, no problem. For those places where I went out of town or on a flight, the day before was, and even in town, I guess as well, was my preparation day. So I would recommend not scheduling residency interviews on back-to-back days if at all possible. One, from a exhaustion standpoint, but two, from a preparation standpoint, you want to have 100% of your energy focused on that residency program. So while you're on your flight, or even the day before, if you're local and you're staying close, you should be finishing all your final research and detailed questions for that program the day before. So look at the preceptors you're going to be interviewing with, see if they've published any new articles or changes that they've made to their program or precepting responsibilities, if you can find that available, because you can have some really impactful conversations during your interview if you have these specifics to talk about. And while I did not know I would be asked about this, while I was interviewing, I was asked by a few interviewers, have you read my recent article in this journal? What do you think about it? And thankfully I had, but I didn't know that would be a question at any point. So having done that research, I think was extremely helpful. The day of the residency interview is definitely exhausting. You want to have a lot of more sleep than you think you need the night before, because this day will be eight-ish hours of you and your 100% energy into talking and thinking and reflecting throughout the whole day. So usually a residency interview is an all-day process. You'll arrive anywhere from 8 to 9 in the morning, usually, when a resident or other person from the program would greet you. You'll likely have, it depends on the structure of the interview, but you'll likely have several interviews with preceptors, current residents, staff, the residency director, maybe the pharmacy administrator of the department. And you'll want to have questions that are tailored to each of these groups of individuals. I know something that was a little bit surprising to me was how much time during the actual interview day I had to ask questions. There was one interview I had where half of each block of my interview time was dedicated to me asking questions. So, half of that half hour was 15 minutes of questions to me, and then half of that time was reserved for me to ask questions. So if I didn't have any questions available, that would have been a really awkward 15 minutes. Other parts of the interview day might include a clinical case. So this could be either on your schedule or it could be a surprise. And really what the preceptors are looking for there is your thought process and how you rationalize your recommendations. You may have to present something, whether that's pharmacy related or not. And that should be told to you way ahead of time, how much time you'll have available. Usually it's only 15 minutes. To present your topic. And then sometimes you'll have a tour of the institution. I'd say one thing that really varied from my interview process was individual one-on-one interviews versus group interviews, which we can probably do a whole nother discussion about because the dynamics in each of those types of interviews is very different. And you can really do well in each of those settings, or you can maybe not shine as much, especially in the group interview.
Well, I guess what I'm concerned about is that kind of fatigue as you go through the day. You may hear the same question over and over again. You can't really stop to say, hey, I just need to get a couple of 5-hour energies or, and so I guess I don't. You kind of have that afternoon kind of downtime or whatever it is. What did you do to keep engaged, or did it just fly by?
That's a good question. I think it was so fast that I didn't realize, what time it was. The days, while they are while they are exhausting, they are jam-packed with stuff. You're basically just going back to back to back to interviews. And even during the lunch process, I forgot to mention that you will go on a lunch likely with the residents. You probably don't have time to eat a whole lot. So try to get as much nutrition as you can during that time, because you might not have that much time to eat. But honestly, getting that full night's rest is super important. And they might offer you coffee at some point throughout the day, although if you're too nervous, that might not be a great idea, because we all know what caffeine does to us. And
no,
it
absolutely.
might not help those
absolutely.
anxieties.
Well, tell me how it works afterwards. So let's say you had 4 interviews, you've gone through 4 interviews, you like one, you decided that maybe that third one that you did wasn't really a good fit after all. How does the match work? I really don't actually understand the process itself. After maybe, let's say I got 4 interviews. And I went through 4 interviews, and I definitely know I want one really bad. I definitely know I don't want this one all of a sudden. And then the other 2 I would take, and I would be happy enough with them. How does that work?
Yeah. So you will get, and this sounds very cliche, but you will have a gut feeling about where your number 1 and probably your number 2 programs are. And I think that decision is probably the most difficult, is 1 versus 2. I know it kept me up at night several times, and I even had a nightmare that I submitted my friend's rank list instead of mine. So anyway,
oh my gosh.
I called her, and I'm like, Christy, I think I submitted your rank list. Anyway, that didn't happen. But the programs that you maybe you thought that it was a good fit when you first met with them, but then the interview wasn't what you thought it was going to be. If you can't see yourself being there for an entire year, 40 to hours amount a week, you don't have to rank all the programs that you interview with, just like the programs don't have to rank all the candidates they're going to interview with. So the match will favor the candidate's preferences. So remember, and I know it's hard to keep this in mind throughout the process, but you are interviewing the programs just as much as they're interviewing you. At the end of the day, the program is likely going to match a resident, but you need to match with the residency that fits you best. So figuring out after each interview, I went through a process where I put, my new rank list in order, and really took a couple of hours at least to reflect on what just happened. How did I feel throughout that interview? What did I really like? What didn't I like as much? How were the current residents feeling about the program itself? And that gut feeling and that intuition will really help you rank your programs at the end of the day. If you don't have that gut feeling, I would say talk with your mentors. Sometimes they can ask you some hard questions to help you really identify where you're thinking you'll end up.
Okay, so now you've got the good news. You've got you match with a program. What happens next? There's a long time between graduation and match day, which I think is March 4th, 2018. I feel like there's people listening to this right now that are like, of course it's March 4th. Everybody's waiting for March 4th. It's just what time that day, So, what is that like? What happens afterwards? Do you get like here's your residency success instruction booklet and maybe a little grief booklet for not matching, or how does it work?
Good question. So I'm trying to think of what it is. So it's right after APHA this year. So I think it's the 20th.
Oh, maybe I am wrong.
Tuesday.
Okay. So maybe I'm off by 3 weeks. That's bad.
That's okay. I think ranking is due sometime that first week of March, that first week. And I believe it's the 20th this year, which is a Tuesday, which is interesting because they usually have it, at the beginning or the end of a week. But that Tuesday is kind of odd. Anyway, you find out your match results, which is very anticlimactic. Tony, I don't know if you got the same. It's very exciting, but it comes in the form. When you went through the scramble, you probably didn't get this. You get an email from the National Matching Service that says one line of congratulations, you matched with, and then your program name, and that's it.
We just got a call from the residency director who just ended up being kind of like a friend because it's Midwest nice. Like, in the Midwest, we're just like, hey, yeah, so we'd love to have you. Yeah. Okay, we'd love to be there. And that was it. Yeah, so I guess I have to tell you a quick story about anticlimactic, and I really let my wife down. So we were infertile for 2 years, waiting for children and all of that. 4 a.m, she comes over and tells me, hey, we're having babies. And I say, okay. And I fall back asleep. So I feel like it's kind of like I let her down. Like I should have had it prepared, like some kind of yes, and I really blew it there. So,
and by the way, it's triplets.
yeah. By the way, it's 3. That news came a little later, but I guess, so you've worked for, you've been in school for 18 years or something like that.
Right.
And you've gotten the residency, you of course are going to be posting on Facebook, on Instagram, and letting everybody know, but I guess what is the next step? Because you got this email, so cool. Yeah. I have somewhere to go July 1st, but now what do I do?
Right. And when I said anticlimactic, I meant the email was the actual opening of the email, finding out the results, one of the best moments of my life that I'll remember forever. It was just funny that it came in the form of like a one-liner. Anyway, so you're in this weird period, right? And usually something I definitely didn't anticipate was that you will have to do some sort of interview / formal process with HR at the institution. So you will have to, formally apply to the position, even though you've matched there, which is awkward, but it's not difficult at all. You just, put your CV there like a regular application. You might have to I know I had a phone interview with HR for maybe a half an hour about how my values lined up with institution values. No more difficult for sure than the residency interview process. And then from there, you're really in, NAPLEX and MPJE prep mode. So making sure that you can pass the boards and take that residency position. I know most programs are looking at either August 1st or around that time to make sure their residents are licensed by that time. But otherwise, you'll likely, hear from the RPD. You might have to go to the hospital to meet and greet with everyone, or attend some sort of orientation a couple days before you start your official residency job. So it is a little bit of a job process, even after you go through all this matching, but definitely not nearly as difficult or stressful as the residency process.
Yeah, Brandon talked about that, how it's a job. They're hiring you for a job, and we maybe have the misunderstanding that we're still going to school. But no, it's a job. It just happens to be a place where you're going to learn a lot. Well, maybe let's transition now to something which is a little more straightforward, getting a PGY2, but not having to go through the match. I talked to residency director at the University of Maryland who does a PGY2 in psych, or she's in charge of a PGY2 in psych. And, sometimes they have, a student or a PGY1, and then that carries over. But I don't understand what that is. What does that mean to not have to go to the match for PGY2?
Yes. So if you're at an institution that has a PGY2 in an area of interest that you're interested in, you can go through the process that's called early commitment, where you essentially take that spot ahead of the match even happening. So basically, it is a little bit formal in the sense that I know I had to submit a letter of intent to my own PGY1 director, who I worked with, every day and knew very well what my intentions were. But from an HR standpoint, there needs to be some formality to this process so that they have documentation that you actually applied to the job and you were interested, et cetera, et cetera. So expressing interest to your residency director and your preceptors as you are in the first half of your residency year can seem a little bit rushed at times. But if you have a clear understanding of where you want to be at the end of PGY1, then sometimes that helps you identify, maybe I do want to early commit to this second year program. Now, you can only do that at an institution that has a PGY2 to early commit to. And I should give one caveat. Not all PGY1 programs that have a PGY2 available will go through an early commit. So it's definitely an important question to ask as you're approaching PGY1 interviews. If they have a PGY2, let's say an AmCare that you're interested in, that might be a question as you get to the residency interview or even beforehand to say, have your PGY1 residents been able to early commit to that second year program because I'm very interested in it. And if they tell you no, that's a good thing to keep in mind. If they tell you yes, that's also a good thing to keep in mind, because then you can anticipate October or November applying to and early securing that program if possible.
So the early commit doesn't follow the January, March calendar. The early commit is literally early, July, August, September, October. That means you're 4 months into your residency where you could early commit.
Yes, usually it's around October or November where the actual commitment happens, because something else that can happen too is, let's say there's 3 PGY1 residents and only 1 PGY2 spot. Well, what if all of the residents want that same spot? And a lot of programs will actually end up going through the match in that case. And they have that option to continue to the match process, the traditional schedule, if they so choose, or if they have no PGY1s that want to early commit, then they would also traditionally go through the match.
That's something that I know a number of students were concerned about is, am I applying to a program where they may already have somebody that they really prefer? Is there any way to know, or is that just kind of luck of the draw where maybe there are 3 PGY1s, like you said, for that PGY2, but since it's open to the full match, there might be other people trying to apply for it from the outside. You would never really know that they're internal and external. It's just, you've applied to this program, or I guess you could intuit that, oh, well, this is a program that has both and that chose to go through the match. I guess I know a lot of students are concerned that, like, well, am I going to this program when they know they're going to probably pick someone else? Is there any advice you could give that way?
So are you talking about PGY2?
Yeah, PGY2, where you have that internal structure, but they've opened it up to the match. Are you really at a disadvantage coming from the outside?
Maybe.
Okay.
And I say this because I've seen some scenarios where the PGY1s are not interested in the PGY2 that's there. So, if the program's going into the match, then likely either their PGY1s haven't demonstrated a strong commitment to the PGY2, or they're in that other scenario where all 3 of them want it. And you wouldn't know unless you have a connection, to those PGY1 individuals. So, if your network is big, then you might be able to find out what's going on with that program. But it could be one of those 2 scenarios. There's probably another scenario that I just thought of because I heard about it from another program lately, where one of the PGY1s was unsure and then decides late that they want to pursue that second year and not early commit, but they'll have to actually go through the match because they missed the early commitment.
Okay.
So they probably have the internal first year advantage because likely the program likes them, if they're there for their first year. But again, you might not ever get to know those details. So I would just recommend, pursuing what it is you want with a passion, and the match will work out the way it's supposed to.
And then as far as a recommendation, and I'm going to go back to retail, then I'll talk a little bit about residency. In retail, you don't get hired as a manager at the store that you were a technician, or you don't get hired as a pharmacist at a store you were a technician. It's just awkward for somebody who was, a subordinate to now be a superordinate or a boss or whatever, manager. Yeah. So is it better to do PGY1, PGY2 at different places, or now that you know the EHR, now that you kind of know some people, you've just gotten your feet under you, is it better to be at the same place? We know what decision you made, but can you give us pros and cons for each?
Sure. Yeah, I think, pros of, I'll start with my more familiar zone of being at the place that I did my PGY1, is exactly what you mentioned, Tony. There's not really a transition time where you're going through orientation again. You already have good relationships with everyone at your site, hopefully, and there is a familiarity with the program. Perhaps a drawback is that you won't grow from learning another system, or maybe miss out on developing new relationships at another program that could have been beneficial for the rest of your career. So, that you definitely weigh that as you're deciding. Depending on if you go to a program outside, let's say a PGY2 outside of your PGY1 institution, there may be more opportunities. A benefit of going outside could be more variety of rotations if it's a larger institution. Those new networking connections that you'll make after that year-long experience. The downsides, again, would be that transition time. Perhaps it wasn't as good of a fit as you thought it was, or you may not have had time to travel as much during PGY1 to get to network and know places as well as you did when you were a student. So there could be some drawbacks that I could see with both of those situations too.
Okay. Well, I want to make sure that we keep these episodes around 20, 30 minutes. I may need to split this one, but maybe next time we'll talk a little bit about your road from PGY2 to an academic career. I know a lot of students are hoping to do the PGY1, PGY2 into academic career. But just as maybe a teaser to better understand what your road was, did you go straight PGY1, PGY2, or did you go into some kind of clinical practice first? What was the road? What did it look like?
Yeah, so I did PGY1 and then I early committed to PGY2 and then took my first academic / practice-based position right after PGY2.
Okay, awesome. All right. Well, Jackie, thanks again for giving us all your insights and being on the Pharmacy Leaders podcast.
Thanks for having me, Tony.
Support